Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go. So you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness.
Welcome to Life Passages. You had the wonderful treat of hearing Daniel Sperry recite a beautiful poem by Naomi Shihab Nye and play music of his cello at the same time. So thank you for bringing that beautiful footage of that poem as you gave it voice and embodiment.
You're welcome. That was actually from a project I was doing for a while called Poetry Sandwich.
Oh, what a great title.
It's actually on Facebook. There's a Poetry Sandwich Facebook page.
Wow.
Where there's a number of videos like that. Naomi Shihab Nye is one of my favorite poets, and that poem in particular is one that I love to do.
And it's the poem Kindness,
Kindness,
right?
yeah.
One of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
So glad you brought it.
Absolutely.
And I know, you know that I know you from your music in the park, playing cello in the park, which I've always enjoyed tremendously. Gives me a lot of good medicine to sit there or sometimes lie down behind on the grass by the flowing creek. And also I've attended several of your evenings of poetry like that with music.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I am finding out now, as we're launching into this project, this TV show here, that you're really engaged in a lot of new things. Your calling is taking new forms.
Things are developing and growing. I started out in the park maybe about 9 years ago. And this was a period, kind of a moment in my life when I realized that I just wanted to be able to do my music, offer that music as whatever kind of gift I could give in that area. And I made that decision sometime around in June of 2008. And I just decided that if anyone asked me to play cello, I would play. That was how definitive it was, that I had to really just lean into being a musician. And what happened was someone invited me to play for their friends in their home, and I didn't have that much of a repertoire at the time, and so I decided to recite a Mary Oliver poem, a long Mary Oliver poem called Flare from A Leaf in the Cloud, and just extemporaneously play whatever came to me as I took sections of that poem. And at the end of that evening, someone came up to me and said, this is really beautiful, what you're doing, but the cello that you're playing, it was a rented cello that I was playing at the time, she said, this really doesn't do justice to what you're trying to accomplish. And I said, well, that's true, but it would take something like $10,000 to get a really good instrument. And she said, well, I have $10,000 and I'd like to give you an instrument. So we went the next day to a shop. This was in Iowa City, and in Iowa, and we picked out this cello, which I call Flair, after the poem, after the Mary Oliver poem. And then I flew back to Ashland, where I lived at the time, and I was going to the park with my son, Gabe, just to goof around in the park, and he wanted to hear the cello. I sat on the stone wall there in the park and I started playing, and about a half hour later, Gabe said to me, Dad, look in your case. And there was all this money in there, and I thought, this is a good thing. I want to keep doing this. So that's how the park thing started.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's,
And
it's
how
been
wise
a-
of you to keep it going, because we
Well,
get a lot out of it.
It's just been a series of miracles. That's
oh,
really,
that would be juicy to hear more
that's,
about.
that's kind of the whole journey has been one sort of opening after the other.
I love that. And I love how when you followed your heart, all the miracles started to unfold, it seems.
They say that can happen, and I've noticed it's true.
Yeah, good news for everyone who's contemplating following their heart. So you're still playing in the park and delighting all of us that hear you, from little tiny ones that are 1 or 2 to elders and all in between. Yeah. And so you're continuing that even though you have other projects, right?
Well,
Or not.
I play in the park not only because it's magical, and it is magical,
That it is.
but it's one of my only ways of supporting myself. So when you decide to become a musician, and everyone who has decided to become a musician knows this, there's no straight path. It's a labyrinthine path, and that happens to be one way that has worked out for me to be able to do things. But so many things have come out of the park, and one of them has been the process of doing what I call musical portraits, because I would notice that when someone was sitting on the bench, what I would play would be sort of attuned to them. And at first I thought, well, this is maybe something like an intuitive reading in music. And of course, you know, I'm in Ashland. Of course I would think that, you know. Of course an Ashlander would turn it into an intuitive reading. But what I came to want to do was spend time with the person enough to really get a feeling for them and then create a whole piece. And then this last year I started wanting to be able to do those pieces just for anyone I discovered anywhere in the Rogue Valley, because by that time I'd done about maybe 50 musical portraits. I went on the road, people I ran into wanted to commission a musical portrait, and I created, you know, pieces of music for them, and there's several CDs worth of just musical portraits. I actually did one that was commissioned by a wildlife league in Ojai, California, for a bear that got shot out of a tree.
Oh my gosh.
I did one for one of the first same-sex marriages in Seattle, Washington, for 2 men who fell in love and got married. So I've done a lot of different ones for different kinds of situations, and that sense of recognizing people with music is something that really activates me. There's something mysterious and amazing about it, because the prompt of a human being is very powerful. And so I decided I wanted to make a movie out of the process of recognizing the courage and heroic journeys of people in the Rogue Valley.
Wow.
By just going out, like I got on a bus at Lithia and Oak with Sean Nipper, the great filmmaker, local filmmaker, and my friend David Terry, great portrait artist, and we went and discovered this woman, Tamu, who was sitting at the bus station, and David painted a portrait of her, and I did a song for her that I wrote with my daughter, Allie, and so that launched this film project that I'm working on.
And you're just following the trail of where you're guided.
Following the trail, yes.
Yeah, good trail it is, with lots of heart, as well as your musician's art. That's exciting. Well, let's maybe pull up a clip that just echoes what you just were speaking of, these elements of your life, from you just journeying on your bike into the park and playing, to then realizing the power of tuning into people with your music. At first, maybe you thought it was just impressions of them, but then really you were tuning into what they need, and the music was bringing elements that they needed. So we're going to ask the control room to bring up that clip.
The story of this project is how does a guy who makes a living from playing in the park, playing cello in the park, from tips that got put in his cello case, and interacting with the community, create like a movement in a way. It's a movement around how we bless each other. Well, the whole idea of medicine music started out with me playing in the park and realizing that when a different person would come along and sit on the bench, something different would happen. So it felt like I was responding to that person individually. And at first I thought that's just about reflection. My music is sort of a mirror in a way for the person. But after I sort of experimented a little bit, I realized that what I wanted to focus on more was, what does the person need? You know, what's the touchstone or what's the musical grounding that would actually kind of give them a hold on something they need for their lives.
Wow, there was a little more in that clip I wanted to hear from. Maybe you can fill it in. You were saying at the end of that, when you ask what
I have
someone
no idea
needs,
what I said at the
yeah,
time.
I think I really enjoyed it when I first saw it. It was something like, when you really ask what someone needs, it's a mystery to you at first, I think you said.
Well, yeah, the process of discovering what it is, and everybody knows this from their own experience, except that we don't do it that much. You know, we don't really lean into what it is that other people need. And there's no blame, no shame.
Well said,
you know,
very good.
In that, you know, we're just moving along at a very, very rapid pace, and we're caught up in something that sometimes feels like a trance-like experience, you know. And one of the things that I've noticed in the park is that people have a chance to relax and begin to tune into things that are in many ways more important to them. So, so the process musically of attempting to tune into what somebody needs is a very interesting process, because, you know, you can ask 3 or 4 questions and not really get an idea of what is going on for them. And then maybe they can say one thing, like one woman I know that I did a musical portrait for, she ended up telling me about this tree farm that she had inherited in East Tennessee, where she would go and walk and take pictures of all these different kinds of trees, and she knew all the different kinds of trees. She hadn't told me that when I first started talking to her. As soon as she told me that, I realized this is like a soul place for her. And this is something that I need to like make this piece of music about her and the trees. So that piece is called Lydia and the Trees. It's a beautiful piece. One of the first musical portraits that I wrote.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I find that too in my counseling work and hypnotherapy. People are talking that all of a sudden something just is like the centerpiece. It's the thing that will take them deeper into their soul. And there it is. And we're talking about your musical portraits. Do you feel ready to share one with us?
Absolutely. I want to do a musical portrait that was commissioned by parents at the Waldorf School here in town, the Siskiyou School, for a teacher, Debbie, who had taken their kids through 8 grades of school. And they wanted this to be a surprise that I would play for the reception after the graduation. And it was a little bit of detective work I had to do to learn something about Debbie because it was a surprise. I couldn't talk to her.
Talk to her.
So I had to talk to her best friend and her son. And so this is called Ground Song, A Blessing for Debbie.
Beautiful. Oh my goodness. Ah,
So that's Ground Song.
that nurtures my soul. I know it was made for Debbie.
Well, you know, this is the other interesting thing about the process is, you know, so I pull something through somehow or other connected to this one person, and then everyone can relate to that.
So true. Maybe our souls are more in attunement and at one than we think.
Everybody's connected.
Yeah. That was so deeply grounding and so deeply nourishing. And I feel so happy you played it in full. Earlier you played a little bit so we could just try in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh no, I don't want to stop. Now I got the whole thing. And it occurred to me, as a musician and songwriter myself, that making these portraits, you just probably have endless doorways to musical journeys and expressions that you might not have thought of yourself, but they're coming, evoking, I mean, the people are evoking them.
That's so true. You know, there are things that people say. A man told me a story about how he wanted to go to the Far East when he was growing up his whole life, and he grew up on a farm in southern Illinois, and his parents would never agree to any kind of thing like that. And later in his life, he made it a stipulation of his employment at a university that he get a sabbatical to go to Bali to study. And so he told me about loving gamelan music. So I found a gamelan sound, and I put this gamelan into this piece of music, and so I never would have even thought of doing anything like that without this prompt of this particular person.
I love that.
Yeah.
It makes, I'm sure, your array of pieces so much more.
There's a lot of diversity. They
Yeah.
go in different ways, and I've started to do songs too, so that's a whole other thing. This woman, Tamu, grew up listening to Sarah Vaughan, so I wanted to create a piece of music, a song that would be kind of in that vein, and I worked with my daughter on it. She's a really good singer-songwriter in Nashville, Tennessee, and there's a certain kind of structure with the lyrics that Sarah Vaughan's songs usually took, where there's a line at the beginning that gets repeated, and we took kind of that structure and then dove into what the story of Tamu was.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I heard some of that on one of the video clips that I had from you, which I loved hearing, that song. How wonderful to co-create musically with your daughter. And we have 2 minutes left, oh my goodness, which means that we are going to, in a moment, go to a beautiful clip of you. It's based on a Rumi poem.
It's based on a Rumi poem named, by the name of Zero Circle.
Okay.
So that's probably going to be the name of the film and music production company that I'm starting, Zero Circle Music and Film.
So when we see and listen to you speak in this clip, that's a section from that poem, Zero Circle by
Right.
Rumi. Okay. Well, let's go to that clip, because gosh, time's flown and here we are.
So what that made me think of is, you made me think of Rumi, be helpless, dumbfounded, unable to say yes or no, and then a stretcher will come from grace to gather us up. And your grace, right?
I love that. And I think what you're really alluding to is we all are grace potentially for ourselves and one another. So thank you for joining us on Life Passages, The Soul's Journey, to experience Daniel Sperry's beautiful music and soul, and the poetry he shared with us as well. And he's going to play us out in a moment as the credits roll for the show, and I invite you to open to grace coming to you and through you in your life going forward. Take care, bless you, be well.